Yes, guys, it's time to get stuck into my final rankings video for the season. How this video is going to work, it's going to be a top 60 broken into 4 different parts, 1 to 15, 16 to 30, 31 to 45, and so on until we get to that number of 60. As I said, this will be the last one that I do in the lead up to the draft. This is kind of now everything has sort of happened in the season. The last time I did my rankings, we were kind of getting through the Coates Talent League finals. We hadn't had the draft combine, lots of different things like that. So now that we've seen the entire picture, I'll kind of just tell you how I've gone about doing this video. Now, firstly, what's different about this one compared to the previous one that I did, I sort of broke them down first into position. So midfielders, defenders, forwards, and it does change your perception a little bit. Where the previous one, I kind of just did it as like an open top 60. This just helps you kind of rank players up against similar types a little bit more, I suppose. And it did change a few little things. There are a couple of big movers in this list, and some of those things may surprise you. Some of that's a little bit combined. Some of that's just me sort of adapting a few new different little philosophies that I've kind of taken on board. And I'll try to talk you through that as we go. And I'll kind of bring into also some of the kind of movements that we've had. So if there has been a big move, I'll kind of mention that and why that is, sort of thing. So the final thing that I want to talk about is just the fact that this is not a mock draft. So this is just my personal draft ranking. So it's not where I think they will go in the draft. It's just where I would do it if I had the next pick in the draft, let's say. So anyway, let's get stuck into this and do it right now. So here are my top 3 rankings. So we've got FinnO'Sullivan there at 1, Lawler at 2, and Sid Draper at 3. Now, the reason that these 3 have gotten to the top, first of all, I'll touch on the rankings. So the first 2, no changes there. 1 and 2 on my previous rankings, they stay the same. Sid Draper's come in from 3 to 4. And what separated these 3 as a group is their pace and explosiveness from the stoppage. They have the ability to break the game open, to drive the ball inside 50 quickly, and get it into those one-on-ones that really has become a huge staple of the modern game in AFL. And while these 3 guys don't necessarily get the biggest numbers of all of the draftees, they are probably the most highly damaging players per disposal. Now, the one thing that separates FinnO'Sullivan and Lawler over Draper here to put them to 1 and 2 is probably just that superior aerial game. You are able to rest them forward, put them inside 50. They can take a grab and kick a match-winning goal. And that's probably something that Draper, although he has kicked the odd goal at SANFL level, we probably haven't seen that consistently from him to be able to hit the scoreboard, and it's more likely to come from a forward half stoppage, which can be a little bit more of a difficult way to score. So I see Foss and Lawler having that superior aerial game, being able to play a little bit taller, kind of ticks more boxes. So they go to 1 and 2. Now, Lawler's probably the more strong, explosive type of the 2 top guys. But I just think overall, FinnO'Sullivan still does have just a slightly more well-rounded game. He's a little bit more poised at times. He has definitely superior lateral movement, that explosive agility that he has. So that just gives him the nod for me, but it's very close between FinnO'Sullivan and Lawler. I'm happy with this top 3 and we'll move on. The next 2 are a couple of smaller bodied midfielders, and they've both come in a little bit here in the rankings. Jagger Smith, he's gone from 5 to 4, and I've got Levi Ashcroft going from 7 to 5. I just think Ashcroft's big game mentality is just too compelling for me to have him any lower than this. I do think there's caps on the athletic traits potentially of both of these players, but Jagger Smith put in a pretty solid combine without being spectacular. So overall, I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the consistency and just the, just the willingness to compete and always just put up those performances. I think there's something pretty admirable about that. So I think both of these players, probably their one wood is just that stoppage craft, that IQ and that creativity. I think Ashcroft, his running ability, his sort of power running is just really, really impressive. Although he doesn't have the speed and explosiveness, he can run at that really high intensity consistently. And when you see players on the field start to tire, he's still outrunning them. He's still there as an option. And that's why he gets such a large number of uncontested possessions. I think from the sheer weight of numbers of Jagger Smith being able to find the loose ball at stoppages, I think that's really powerful for any team. And then the way that he can create is really good as well. I think at times both of these 2 players, compared to that top bracket, they probably lack a little bit of penetration at times. So they don't have like super long kicks. Sometimes they look to sort of recycle the ball as opposed to take it forward, and that's just why I've knocked them back. But I think overall the season, if you just weigh everything up, it's just a little bit too compelling to have these two players any lower. The next one on the list I've got as a solo here. He's number 6. He's come in a little bit on my list as well. It's Leo Lombard. I think he was at about 9 on the previous one. Now, he's right up there with the power and the explosiveness of those top 3 midfielders. He's a little bit harder to judge in the fact that because he plays for the Gold Coast Academy, we don't get to see him a lot against the similar type players. He plays a lot of VFL football. He's obviously really good at that level, but he doesn't sort of get 30, 35 disposal games on the regular to sort of compare him against. Obviously, his national championships is where he really showed his stuff. I think 6 is actually quite low for Lombard when you look at some of the traits that he has. He can break away from stoppage. He's really dangerous around goals, and his running game, that combination of the speed aspect and the endurance part of his game is just fantastic. So he's perfectly built for the AFL. I think he's one that'll come in and hit the ground running for sure. I haven't sort of compared him up against anyone here because I've got a group of big-bodied mids in the next bracket that we'll talk about now. So coming in at 7 then, and he sort of wins, I guess, this battle for the big body midfielders in the end. And like I said off the top, in order to do this video, I did go back and look at a bit of footage from earlier in the year. I wanted to look at development, but I also wanted to kind of avoid having recency bias too much throughout this as well. So I've gone with Josh Smiley at 7. There's a few little things about his game that worry me. I think for his size, and his athleticism is actually really good. Like some of his running verticals were really strong, and I don't think he uses that in game with his marking all that well. But when you look at the package, like he's mid 190 centimeters, he's a huge guy. He moves so well for someone that size. He's quite quick. Under 3.1 it was for the sprint, so he got in a pretty good time there. His agility is really good for a big guy, so I don't see him having any trouble that some of the big body midfielders have at stoppage, like kind of being sloppy over the ground ball and those sorts of things. He's quite smooth moving. He's a beautiful user by foot. I'd love it if he had that little bit of extra, I don't know, sort of mongrel in him in the contest. And what I mean by that is just probably in the air. I wish he had a little bit more mongrel. He was a little bit more fearless at going for some of those balls. But overall, I think if you've got a 194 centimetre midfielder that can use the ball like him, that can move like him, I think it's a pretty good project to invest in. So I've gone with him at number 7, which means Harvey Langford is number 8 on the list. And he was at 3 on my previous list. So he is a bit of a slider here. Now, the combine, I've got to admit, it did scare me off a little bit. He put in a 3.25, I think it was 20-meter sprint, which is quite slow. And it's not as if we didn't know that. Like, we knew Harvey Langford wasn't quick. Just watching him play in a game, he plays quite slow. His skills are around his footy IQ, his stoppage craft, those little handballs that he gets out, and he uses his body really well. And then he's got that beautiful left foot penetrative kick. So when I'm putting him up against those other top midfielders, he has a lot of boxes that he's ticking. He ticks the being a big body in your midfielder, just getting that enforcer in there. Then he's got the skills by hand and the skills by foot. So a lot of boxes, so I don't think I could have him any lower than 8. But just when you look at that speed, he does seem to tire out, not having that sort of max speed to be able to go out when he is doing the endurance stuff with a repeat sprint efforts. He probably does tire out a little bit. I worry a bit about that kind of stepping up to the AFL level. So a lot of this is to do with the combine and just going back over footage and, seeing how he performed as well in those VFL games. Maybe he dropped off a little bit from the Coates League, which means he's kind of relying on some extra physicality. So he goes to 8. And the next guy on the list that's sort of in this group of 3 that we have on the graphic here is Bo Allen. So he's 9. Another 190 centimetre midfielder. So you can package these 3 up as your big body mids. It's just kind of how you rank that. And it goes back to what I was talking about putting them into groups, and then you get to kind of see them. Who would I take? I would go very close with these 3 players. I would go very close to putting Bo Allen at 7, Smiley 8, Langford 9, even doing it that way. Bo Allen has so much room for development here. The athleticism is just outmatched. A super 20-meter sprint. He ran a really good 2K time trial, so he's got hybrid attributes. His vertical jumping is amazing, and you can see that in his game, the way that he flies at the football. And while there is a little bit of a rawness to his game, you could see him projecting into someone like an early sort of Nathan Fife and Elliot Yeo, that type of sort of boisterous, really physical, explosive midfielder. So I think the sky's the limit for him. I couldn't go any higher than 9 just because of the quality ahead of him. And I guess the performances on some level that the others have put down. I think Josh Smiley is a really tricky one to rank and to kind of miss out on there. So I've ended up going with Bo Allen at 9. I think that's a little bit harsh on what he potentially could be. And the next guy I absolutely love, who comes in at 10, it's Alex Tyrou. I've packaged him up here with Luke Trainer at 11 because I think they've been the best 2 defenders or key position players probably throughout this draft year. Early on, it was Trainer, and I just want to kind of juxtapose these two and just sort of have a look at some of the traits. So I think from an athletic point of view, I think Tyrou has the aerial game of Tyrou is a little bit superior to what Luke Trainer can do. And I think as a fundamental key position player, I think that wins out. I think his contested marking, his intercept marking game is slightly better than Luke Trainer. Certainly if you flip that and then you go to with the ball traits like the ball use, I think Trainer stacks up really well. So as that sort of not hybrid athlete, but hybrid profile in game, I think Trainer probably ticks a few more boxes, but then Alex Tyrou has a few higher end traits with just, even as well with the character, because some of the fearless traits that he shows at flying at the contest, you don't get that from every player. So I think that's really special and someone that you can, plug and play in the back half like Tyrou. Similar to a James Sicily, he's a little bit bigger, which kind of means that he can play on some taller opponents in Sicily, but he has some of those same traits. So I found it really hard to split these two when I put them up. So I had to go with 10 and 11. I know Trainer was 17 on my previous list, so he has come in a little bit here. I just think maybe most of the content creators that are doing draft stuff, me included in this, we probably got a little bit, we bought into that hype around the concussion stuff, and we don't really know how true that is. So I've kind of restored Luke Trainer back to where he should be. Then the next group I've got here is a group of 2. I've got the injured Taj Houghton, and I've got a big slider, the biggest slider on this list, which is Murphy Reed. So I'll explain that a little bit. I've got Taj Houghton at 12. He was previously 13, so he's come up 1 place. I had him even at one point doing this list a little bit higher. I think he has a huge ceiling. I've talked about the Shea Bolton, the Isaac Rankin comparisons, and he's got that agility, that explosivity, an athletic profile that you really like, a midfielder that is forward of centre that can take overhead marks as well. So he has a really all-rounded game and one that projects really well, Taj Houghton. As for Murphy Reed's slide, I did the, kids up against the wall, you're picking a football team. And I think when you're relying so much on your creativity and your skill in and around the contest, I think it's probably a little bit easier to shut someone like a Murphy Reed down from a game. And I think if you've got a team with 1 pick in the draft, and that's the way I'm doing it, I'm doing it as if I'm picking individually each player, it's hard to take Murphy Reed over some of those other players that are, have more physicality, they have more power, they have more athleticism, that can probably still compete with him in the ball-winning traits. So that's dropped him down a little bit. His previous ranking was 6 and he's gone to 13. And I love him. I love watching that sort of player, but I've had to, just on a functionality thing, I've had to drop him down a little bit, unfortunately. We start to round out this top 15. This is the first part of the video, as I said. So Toby Travaglia comes in at 14. He's just one that I can't really put him up against anyone else on this list. He's just that sort of hybridy defender, a running defender that can take marks in the air. He's got midfield qualities in the future, I think, someone similar to a Will Day, which I've mentioned a lot of the time. So he's just a real kind of on-talent one that I just sort of have to plug in there at 14. That's where I'd want to pick him up in this draft. And then at 15, the first small forward, and this is probably going to be a pattern throughout the video, that I have a gravitation towards small forwards. I prefer those ground ball players to the aerial players in general. I know you've got to have the aerial players, of course, but some of the with the ball traits of Joe Berry, his speed, his nous around goal, his ability to hit the scoreboard just inevitably throughout the season was amazing, and he's got some really good AFL traits. So he comes in to round out the video. I'm pretty happy with that list. I've mulled over it for a while. I've chopped and changed things a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how this goes up against the mock draft that I do closer into the draft. So that is a wrap for this video. A short one, a 1 to 15. I hope I sort of did that in a little bit of a different way, I guess, so you can see some of the reasoning behind it as well. As I said, it's not a mock draft. It is a rankings video based on my personal opinion. Let me know how I did in the comments below, guys. What would you guys do? How would you rank these players if you were a recruiter? Let me know, and I'll see you next time.